All right, and we are live. We'll wait a few minutes so that people can come on in, but welcome to TouchMix webinar.
Welcome to another edition of TouchMix webinar workshops.
Good morning from us. Good afternoon, or I don't know. Good evening. I don't know where you
Yeah,
are, but thank you for joining us.
we have had a number of international attendees, which
Oh
is
yeah,
pretty exciting. Yeah, so
awesome.
if you're somewhere from around the globe, welcome, and thanks for staying up late to hang out with us and take the lesson here, or whatever time it might be.
I think we might have a few more coming in,
Okay.
but we got a solid amount right now, so we can go ahead and start getting introductions and the general flow of things going. My name is Jacob. I'm going to be moderating the webinar. I am the training coordinator and training website manager at QSC. So if you've ever been on training website, you've probably dealt with me in some capacity. So thanks. We have Jason. He's going to be leading the webinar and teaching you all about TouchMix group channels. And we have two other co-panelists with us. We have Golden and Stu. They're going to be the experts who are going to help out Jason answering questions and kind of get in the flow. Go ahead and say hi, guys.
Hey.
How's it going?
Cool.
All right.
So just a few things before we do get started. We do want this to be a little informal. We want you guys to be able to ask questions. Don't feel embarrassed or shy. If you do have any questions, go ahead and throw them in the Q&A. When you throw them there, we'll be able to look at them and see if we can get to your question within the hour that we have today. But also, if you do have a microphone, we can unmute your mic and you can ask your question live. And so we can kind of get a conversation started and just have you guys feel like you're part of the process a little more. You can also raise your hand. There's an option to do that. But we do like it if you throw your question in the Q&A just so we can see what your question is. But with that, I think that's everything. Jason, you want to take it away?
Let's go. All right, so the topic today is using the channel groups on the TouchMix. And the channel groups are a really fantastic way to kind of condense your channel count if you're mixing an event that has a particularly large channel count. So as you start to mix more and more channels of audio, sometimes it can get overwhelming, and the groups are there to help with this. So all three of the TouchMix models have two different types of groups, with the TouchMix-30 Pro offering an additional third group type. So the two main group types that are available on all three models are going to be the mute and the DCAs. So the third group is going to be the TouchMix, or sorry, on the TouchMix-30 Pro. This group is called subgroups, and so we're going to kind of break down each of these different group types and explain what the differences are, and can show you how to use them in various applications. But in general, as I said, groups allow you to control the overall mix with fewer faders. So you can make instrument groups like guitars, or a group of keyboards, or a drum kit is a really good option for a group because you usually have a lot of different channels for a drum kit, and you can throw them all into a group. You can also make them from multiple different microphone types. Maybe you're in a theatrical performance or some sort of stage event where you've got different lavalier mics or maybe some headset mics, and you want to kind of group your different microphone types and things like that. So there's all kinds of applications for using groups. And we're going to go ahead and just to outline the three different types really quickly, and then we'll dive into each one in more detail. So mute groups, DCAs, and subgroups. A mute group, pretty much the name implies what it does. It allows you to mute a number of channels all at once. So with a single mute button, you can engage many channels and mute them all at the same time. A DCA also has the same ability to mute multiple channels, but it will also apply or take away gain from any of the channels assigned to it. So now we're adding an additional element there. We're adding another layer with the DCA, so now we can control the level of an entire group of channels. And then a subgroup takes that even a step further. So on the 30 Pro, you have the subgroup option, which gives you the mute and the level control. And then we add the ability to add processing to that group of channels. So now you can add things like EQ, effects, compression, limiting to your entire group of channels. So that's what we're doing today. That's what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to punch over to my mixer view, and we're going to get right into it. A couple of things I do want to kind of call out. I'm sure you guys saw in your confirmation email that we provided a download package that had some audio files in it that we can work with. They are the same audio files that I will be using today. It is a full 24-track mix that I'm going to be working with today. I'm going to be working on a TouchMix-30. If, however, you're using a 8 or a 16, there is a mix down of that where it works only using 8 channels. So it's sort of a smaller mix of that session only using 8 channels. So you can pull that up and you'll be able to kind of follow along with me using that as well. In addition to that, if you did not get the download, or if you don't have a mixer with you, or if you just kind of want to watch and follow along away from your mixer, that's perfectly fine. We're doing something a little different this time. My mixer audio is going to be broadcast through another web browser. And the reason we're doing this is because kind of looking back on the quality over the Zoom calls here, when I get my audio going on, it doesn't sound that great and it can be a little distracting. So we're going a different way with this. So you will not hear my mixer's audio through the call here. So if you want to hear what I'm doing, Jacob is going to drop a link in the chat, and that will allow you to grab the stream of my mixer so you can listen to it that way. And that gives you a little bit of additional control. You can kind of control the volume that you're listening to my mixer on versus me in the actual call here. So hopefully this works out a little bit better. I'm pretty excited about it. So Jacob, if you could drop that link, and we'll go ahead and proceed.
It's been dropped.
Cool. So if you get the link, it'll just take you to a basic web page, and you'll get a little prompt to start listening. Just make sure you click that, and then from there on out, that'll be where you can hear my mixer. Okay, all that's out of the way. So let's talk about mute groups. We'll start with the simplest group, which is the mute groups. As I already stated, a mute group is simply going to mute a group of channels. And I'm going to go ahead and switch over now to my channel or my mixer view. So I've kind of already got my mix set up. Again, if you are following along, included in that package along with the tracks were a couple of scenes. So if you did want to follow along with me, go ahead and recall one of those starting scenes. There are 2 different ones. If you're using a TouchMix-30 and you've got the full 24 channel count there, you can recall the one that is groups starting scene. If you're using a TouchMix 8 or 16, you're going to want to recall the one that is the mix down. So GP starting scene, MXD, abbreviation for mix down. And so go ahead and recall either of those scenes. And just to illustrate that one more time, you know, from your mix view, from your channel home view, you can just go into menu, go into scenes, select the scene you want to start with, hit this recall button, confirm it, and then it'll show you the scene title here under current scene, as well as up in the corner in the button there. Let me move my screen a little bit so you can see that a little better. Okay, there we go. Great. Okay, so we're all started up. I've kind of got my mix already done. I've got it ready to go, and now I want to start to kind of group things together. The first thing I'm going to do is set up mute groups. So to access your mute groups, you're going to press the mute groups button, which is located in your button cluster that's above the wheel. You can't see that in my screen here, but I promise it's there. And if you're looking at a mixer, it should be very obvious. So you have your wheel here, your big encoder wheel, which you can use to select a channel and select parameters and then make those adjustments there. Up above here, there's a button called Mute Groups. You can go ahead and push that, and then we get to this screen. So this is our mute group screen, and this is where we can activate our mute groups. You have 8 mute groups, and you come in here, and then you can activate and toggle on or off your different mute groups. Right now, they're not doing anything because we have not configured them. So if we want to set these up and then start assigning channels to these mute groups, we're going to hit the Edit button that's right up here in the right-hand corner. So I press Edit, and now I'm looking at the setup page for all of my mute groups. And up at the top, I've got different tabs, different navigation tabs, which allow me to switch in and out of my 8 different mute groups and assign them as I want. So it's very simple. All we have here are assignment buttons. So as you touch these buttons, you're just assigning those channels to this mute group. And then when that mute group is activated, when you mute that group, all of the channels that are in here are going to be muted all at once. So I'm going to set a couple of these up, and I'm actually going to do this so that I can use these a little bit later in the lesson. This is a little bit of a spoiler alert. I'm going to create a couple.
Jason, we have one participant asking if you can make the screen larger or more full screen.
I can try. Let's see here. See if I can punch in a little bit more. Is that a little bit better?
Oh yeah, it looks great.
Right. You got my face in the corner there. That's kind of blocking some of that, but that should be okay for the most part. All right. Okay. Good suggestion. Thanks. Hopefully that was helpful for a few people. we'll get that squared up a little bit. Okay, so we're going to configure a couple of mute groups here. And what I'm actually going to do is configure a couple of mute groups which will allow me to just kind of solo out a couple of channels. I want to mute out a bunch of my channels so that I can isolate and listen to just a couple of things at a time. And this is a great application for mute groups. So I'm going to go ahead and just touch my assignment buttons, and the first one I'm going to give myself is I'm going to give myself the ability to isolate my horn section. So I select all of my channels except for my 3 horn channels there. Okay, so that's my first one, and then I'm going to name it. I'm going to select that name field right up here. It's going to give me my keyboard. I can clear out the generic name and I can say horns solo, enter. And I've named my mute group. And you're going to see me doing this throughout the lesson as I work with the different groups. It's always a good idea to just make it a habit to name your groups and be naming channels in general as you're working through the mixer. It just makes your workflow a lot easier and more efficient. And you always kind of know what you're looking at and you're not guessing, or what did I set up on mute 1, or how did I set up DCA 1? Just go ahead and give them a name as soon as you make the configuration there, and it's going to just really amplify your workflow. Okay, so that's my first one. The second one I'm going to create here, I'm just going to create 2. Is I'm going to do the same thing, but I want to isolate my lead vocals there. So I want to have the ability to hit a mute group and just solo out my lead vocal group, basically. So I'll select everything except for that one vocal channel. And if you've participated in a few of these other webinars, we've actually kind of done this throughout those trainings for various purposes, so this probably look familiar to you. But if you're joining us for the first time, this is how you set up a mute group. And I'm going to name this guy lead vox solo. Lead aux solo. Yep. This is an audio lesson, guys, not a spelling lesson. Okay. So I've got my 2 mute groups. Aside from the application that I'm using here, mute groups can be great for like corporate settings. If you're mixing a board meeting and you have different groups of tabletop microphones that you kind of need to punch in and out throughout the discussion. Or if it's like a theatrical performance or a stage performance and you have a segment in the performance where there's going to be a solo performance, you can set up a mute group that'll immediately mute all of the other channels on the stage so you don't have any open microphones on the stage that aren't the soloist at that one given moment. So just a couple of other applications in which you might use mute groups. But we've got our 2 set up now. Now if I just press the mute group button one more time, there we go. Now I get back out to my mute groups page and I can see I've got my first 2 here that I've named and I've configured them. And now if I hit this button, now I've activated my horn solo mute group. If I press home to get back out to my mix view, my channel fader view, you'll notice that all of my channels that I have selected in that mix are now muted. So here we go. We got a bunch of mutes happening here. Now there we go. Now my 3 horn channels are unmuted, and that is what I wanted to happen when I activated this mute group. I also want to point out that the mutes themselves are bright orange. They're not red. If you mute a channel directly with its channel mute button, that button turns red. That's to indicate that you've muted the channel directly from the channel itself. When the mutes highlight orange like this, that's letting you know that the channels are muted, but it's muted within a group somewhere. So you either have a mute group or maybe a DCA or a subgroup that these channels have been assigned to, and that group is currently being muted. So it's going to mute all of your channels all at once and highlight in this different color to kind of allow you to do that. All right, so I'm going to turn this off, and there you go. So that's the first one, mute groups, already done. Super easy, super effective. So now we're going to talk about the next group, which is available on all 3, which is the DCAs. So as I mentioned, the DCAs are going to give us the ability to control level now. To access the DCAs, this is one of the ones that's blocked by my big head here. It is going to be the very last channel bank in your navigation strip on your main home mix view. Okay, so it's going to be the very last one over to the right. We're going to press that, and then we have our 8 DCA channels here. So now we have a fader instead of just a button, a mute button, right? So we still have a mute button. So with our DCAs, we still can mute any of the channels that have been assigned to it. We've also got a fader level change there. So to set this up, just like accessing any of our other channels on TouchMix, we're going to select the name above its fader, and that's going to take us into the setup of the DCAs or of the channel. And now this looks almost identical to the setup of the mute groups, right? We have our 8 navigation tabs up here, so we can access our 8 different DCA groups. And we have some simple assignment buttons now, so we can start assigning channels to these groups. And now from here, it's kind of up to what you're doing, or up to what your performance is, or what you're mixing, to figure out what makes sense, kind of what group types are going to make sense. So for something what I'm doing, I'd probably group my different instrument types together. I would probably start with my drum set, because obviously, in my mix here, the mix I'm working with, I have 7 channels for my drum set alone. I can throw those all on a DCA now, and now I have one fader that allows me to control the overall level of my entire drum set, instead of going into all my 7 of my channels and trying to push them and pull them, and keep them relative to each other. Now I have one fader to do that, and of course I'm going to name it. I'm going to say drums. My next tab, if we're just continuing on with this, I can maybe have a guitar. I've got a couple of guitar channels here. I have 2 in particular. So if you have more than one guitar player, or if your guitar player has a 2 mic configuration, they have 2 mics on their cabinet, that's going to take 2 channels in your mixer. It might make sense to group those together. Keyboards is another great one. In this mix that I'm working with, I have 4 keyboard channels. So I have a digital piano and a digital organ in this mix, and each keyboard, each electric keyboard, typically will have 2 outputs. It'll have a left and a right. It'll be a stereo out. So that will take up 2 channels in your mixer. So even if you had 1 keyboard in your mix, grouping that stereo pair would make sense. Or if you have more than one, you're taking up a higher channel count with those instruments, and you can group them together because they're all keyboards. And I would name this keys. Vocals, obviously, if you have more than 1 vocal channel, I'd go to my next DCA, and I'd name this Vox, and I've got my lead and my 2 female backup vocals, and I can group them together as well. So now I have one control to push and pull, that section, the vocal section there. And this is probably a pretty fine setup, depending on the band you're mixing or the event you're mixing. A couple of DCAs just to give you some broader control over the mix with a small number of faders. You could keep going. If I wanted to maybe set one up for bass, you could do that. I'll name this one bass, and I'll assign. So I do have 2 bass channels in this mix here. I've got a direct input for my bass, and then I've got an actual mic on the cabinet on stage. So I got 2 channels for my bass. If you don't have 2 channels for your bass, it might not make sense to put it on a DCA, or you might want to do it anyway, just so that you can kind of stay on the DCA screen and have access to all of your different instrument types or your different groups in your mix, plus your main fader. You have just one group of one bank of faders that you're running the whole show from. A couple of additional things that we can do with this, if I go here, I can set one up to maybe control the level of all my effects. I can assign all of my effects masters to a DCA. And I can name this effect. So now I have a single fader, and that gives me the ability to either push or pull all of my effects from my entire mix at any given moment. Now there's another reason why I brought that up, and I want to kind of talk about what the DCA is actually doing. I mentioned it's adding and subtracting gain from each channel that is assigned to it, but I want to show you something. We're going to actually watch this work. So we've set up the drums one here. I'm going to go back up to my home screen, so I've got my DCA faders. I'm going to pull this all the way down, and I'm going to start my audio. So if you got the stream there, you should be able to hear this. Okay. So with this DCA all the way down, the drums are sort of absent from the mix. Now it is a live mix, so there are other microphones that are on the stage that are still picking up the sound of the drums, but the drums themselves are, the main presence of the drums is gone. And if I ride this up, you'll hear that return. There we go. Now all my actual drum mics are back in the mix. And I can push it up so I can really kind of accentuate what I'm doing there. I can pull it down so I can ride the entire drum set with this fader. I'm going to turn it down again. I'm going to go ahead and stop the audio. I'm going to go over to my inputs where my drum set lives here. Now look, none of the faders actually moved, okay? So the DCA isn't controlling the actual channel faders. What it's doing is it is adding or subtracting gain to each of the channels that is assigned to it from the relative position of each of those faders. So looking at these faders here, if I then go to my DCA, and I leave it at unity. So unity on the DCA, or the 0 mark there that represents unity, that represents no change. The DCA is doing nothing to any of these channels. You're just listening to the exact level that it is set to in the mix. If I add 3 dB on my DCA, now I've just added 3 dB to each of my channels from the relative position of each of those channel faders. Okay, it's not actually moving the faders, it's just adding 3 dB of gain to each channel. And in the inverse of that, if I take that down to unity and go negative 3 dB, well, yes, it's removing, it's subtracting 3 dB from all of those channels. So that is what the DCA is doing. That's how it works. And I wanted to mention the effects in here because of the nature of how this is working, how it's adding and subtracting gain to the signal there. It actually will also push those channels, those signals into the effects. If they're routed to any effects at all, it will push those into the effects a little hotter or a little softer as you're moving that fader. So that's something to be aware of. It's not necessarily a bad thing or a good thing, it's just the way it works, and so that's good to be aware of, because you could end up in a situation where maybe you have a vocal section or something like that, and you want to push that vocal section a little hotter for a certain section of the song and really get them a little bit more above the mix. If you push it too hard, depending on the effects that you have on those vocals, you might end up kind of washing things out a little bit, because it is going to hit those effects a little harder. So that's something to be aware of, and we're actually going to kind of circle back to that a little bit later in the lesson. But in general, this is a DCA. That's how they work. That's how you set it up. Another good tip is anytime you're assigning or unassigning channels from a DCA, it is always recommended that you have the fader for the DCA set at the unity position, because that means no change. If you have the fader either lower or softer and you go in here and you start unassigning and then reassigning different channels to that, you could end up with sudden changes in volume to certain channels, and that could be detrimental. You might not want that. So actually, a really super easy way that you can immediately reset a DCA fader to unity is by pressing the 0 button. There is a 0 button directly above your encoder wheel there. If you press that, that will automatically reset all of your DCA faders to that unity mark. So if I select that, I know that's down there, I need to reset it. Bam, there you go. So there you go. So we've seen a relatively a fine example of a DCA setup for the mix I'm working with here. Again, depending on what you're doing, this might not make sense. It's kind of up to you to determine, what groups of things might fit the best. As I mentioned, if you've got a bunch of tabletop microphones in a corporate meeting or something like that, or if it's a theatrical performance and you have a bunch of performers with headsets on, or maybe some lavaliers and things like that, or even different types of handheld mics throughout the event, it can make more sense to sort of start grouping those things together and giving yourself the ability to control those groups of microphones and things like that with fewer faders. The other thing that I want to touch on while we're on DCAs here is you can use DCAs to kind of help yourself and set yourself up to be able to solve problems that may or may not arise in your mix, in particular feedback. A common occurrence is during a live performance that's using stage monitors, for one or more of those monitors to start feeding back at any given point during the performance. Now you can try to mitigate this with the tools on here like the anti-feedback and things like that, and you do have a great tool in and of itself that you can kind of punch in there at any point and kind of make surgical EQ moves that it can eliminate that feedback. But if it's a scenario where you have a bunch of monitors on the stage and you're in a front of house mixing position and you hear the feedback, the performers are hearing the feedback, the audience is hearing the feedback, everyone's looking at you, but you have no idea which one of those monitors is feeding back from where you are. A good thing to do before the show starts would be to simply create a DCA that includes all of your auxes, or at least all of the auxes that you're using in the performance. You set that up beforehand. You can name that aux because we're going to want to be naming everything. Now, when that arises, something's feeding back, you got to figure it out quickly. The first thing you need to do is just stop the feedback, right? You can grab this fader and you can just ride that down and just lower all of your stage monitors until the ringing stops, until the feedback stops, and then you can go in and you can start trying to figure out which one was feeding back, and you can address the problem. Once you've got it fixed and you got it taken care of, then you come back and you can ride that DCA fader right back up to whatever position you had it at for the show level. So that's another example, another use case for your DCAs. So there's a lot of a lot of different things you can do with these. So I hope that was helpful, and that was pretty quick. So we got through our mutes and our DCAs pretty quickly. They are extremely easy to set up. Like I said, I set up an entire DCA mix with just in a few minutes here. I've got myself some mute groups. And so it's very quick, very easy to do, and can be really advantageous for a number of different scenarios. So kind of making this a part of your workflow can really elevate your mixes and elevate your workflow, and just make mixing a performance throughout the event a lot smoother and a lot easier. Okay, now let's go ahead and talk about the subgroups. So the subgroups are available on the TouchMix-30 Pro, sort of exclusively. And you access them right here. So right next to the DCAs on a TouchMix-30 is your new navigation tab called Subgroups. You select that, and we have our subgroups bank showing us our 8 subgroups. Now, as I did mention, the subgroups are now giving us the ability to apply processing to the group of channels. So we've taken it a step further. We still have a fader here, so we can still control the overall level of anything that's assigned to these. I can still mute or unmute anything that's assigned to there. But if I go into the channel now, by pressing the name above the fader, of course, now this actually looks more like a channel strip. We have processing in here because what's happening is we are routing signal through the group now, as opposed to a DCA. No signal is actually passing through the DCA. It's just applying gain or subtracting gain. It's actually DCA, just to give you a little more of a well-rounded explanation of that, before we move on here, DCA stands for Digital Controlled Audio. And you might be familiar with that term. You might be familiar with another term called VCA, which is Voltage Controlled Amplifier. They work very much the same way. It's sort of just the digital version of that. And so, yeah, so the DCA isn't taking in any signal and affecting any signal. It's just applying, gain to those channels. With a subgroup, we're rerouting the signal now. We're taking the signal into the group, and then that allows us to process it in a bunch of different ways and use this very advantageously in a lot of different scenarios. The 3 primary uses for a subgroup, however, we'll kind of just address these in use cases. There's 3 different methods, we'll call it. The first method would be to apply common processing to a group of channels within the main mix. And so we're going to just return that to the main mix, and we're going to be able to make broad and common changes, processing changes and level changes to a group of channels, and we're going to hear that in the main mix. The second method would be to use subgroups to start routing subgroups out to our different auxes. And then we can take our auxes out, and we can set up what is very commonly known as stems. It's where you take a group of channels, a high channel count, and you condense it to a single channel, again, like a drum set. You take a drum stem, which the stem itself is a single channel, which includes all of your drum channels. So you've condensed it down to one channel, and now we can send that out of an aux, and we can create a bass stem, a guitar stem, or whatever the performance is. We can create different stems and send these out discretely through our different aux outputs, and then deliver them to an external device, which could be a recording device. Maybe we want to record the event, and we still want to have some control over the mix that we're recording, but we don't need the broad, the big fader mix. We just kind of want to have our groups, so we can have some broad control over the mix of the different groups in the recording, or we can deliver these to another mixer. That's called sub-mixing. So we might want to have like a pre-mix on one mixer, and then there's a main mixer for the main event, and so we're pre-mixing a group of channels on the pre-mixer, and then delivering those to our main mixer as stems, and so we have a smaller channel count in our main mixer. So that's another application here. The third one would be to use a blend of different subgroups within a single aux, and so we'll talk about that one as we move along here. But first, let's just get into setting up our subgroups. So we're in the subgroup here. We've got everything that you would expect, within any of our actual channels. We've got an overview screen. We've got EQ. We've got limiting or compression. We can apply effects here, so we have all of our effects. We can route this out to auxes, which is kind of what I just mentioned. And then we've got presets, so you can, we don't have any factory presets for the subgroups, but you do have the ability to save your own. So if you configure a preset or configure a subgroup in a particular way, you can go ahead and save those settings and recall them within your different subgroups. And then finally, our setup tab, here we go. Now we have the assignment button. So this is going to be sort of the main way that we can set up all of our subgroups. First thing we need to do here is get signal into the group so that we can start manipulating it how we need to. And this is how you do that. So we have our assignment buttons just like with the mute and the DCA. Before we do that, however, we need to pay attention to this top control here. This is called unassign input channels from main left and right when assigning to this group, okay? What that means is if you toggle this to yes, which mine already is, it will default to no, so it'll look like that. It'll be on no there. If I change this to yes, which in most applications, you're going to want to change this to yes. So what that's doing is it is automatically, as soon as you assign something to this group, it is rerouting that signal into the group and it is taking it out of the main output. So it is no longer going directly to the main output. It is going into the subgroup instead and then out of the subgroup back into the main output. A little bit how kind of effects work. We're kind of rerouting the signal, but instead of blending the two together, we're sticking with a linear signal, and it's just going into the group and then back out to the main. The inverse of that, and we'll talk about this in a little while, if I leave that to no, that means that it is going to continue, those channels are going to continue to go to the main output as well as through the group, and then the group will kind of blend them back in as you move the group fader up. There are some applications for that, which we'll talk about. For the most part, what you're going to want to do is do that, and then it's just going to automatically unassign those channels from going to the main. Otherwise, you'd have to go into each channel individually and manually unassign each one, and that just takes more time. So with this option, it automatically happens. And now we're free to set this up. So I can kind of use the same paradigm that I use for DCAs if I wanted to. I could just set one up for a drum set, and be able to have that. I can go drums here. That's fine. And now if I wanted to, I can apply maybe some limiting or some compression to this drum set and kind of glue it together a little bit. I can go into my next subgroup here, and this one can do the same thing. It can be a guitars subgroup. I can go, I can do another one for keys and assign all my keys here. Did I grab my guitars here? I did not. There we are. Vocals is probably a good one to have. You can do a lot of nice processing using a subgroup to vocals and things like that. On my mix, I've got a horn section, so I'm going to set up a horn section in mine. I'll do a horns subgroup, and this is actually kind of where I'm gonna start with actually applying some processing now. So what I want to do first, before I get my audio going, is now that I've set up a couple of them, I've got a horns, I've got a vocals, I've got a keys, I've got guitars, and I've got drums. I'm going to go ahead and go back to home. So now I can see all of my subgroup faders here, and they're all named, so I know what they all do. And if I go back into my inputs here real quick, I'll just start with my kick drum. So now look, now it's automatically been unassigned from the main, so that's what it does. So this control in here, within the setup tab, you do have the ability to assign or unassign any of your channels to the main output through this assignment. By toggling that little toggle in the subgroup assignments page, it automatically turns this off for you, so you don't have to come back into this channel and unassign that. While we're here, I also want to point out that there are assignment buttons within the channel setup screen of every channel. So this is another way that you can get channels into any of your groups. So right here I have all of my subgroups, I have DCAs, and I have mute groups. And if I just kind of scrub through my channels a little bit here, you can see all of those options remain there. And so from within each channel, if I know I want to assign it to any of my particular groups, if I'm already working in the channel, or if I just prefer to come in and work this way from within the channels, I do have the option to route this to any of my groups right from in the channel. So I did want to show you that. Okay, so now I'm going to play some audio, and because we've unassigned all of these channels from the main, and they're going through my different subgroups now, listen to what happens. If you got the feed, you should be able to hear this. Sounds weird, right? So
I can't actually hear the feed. I have it open on my web browser.
Open. Huh.
And it says connected,
it says it's
streaming
broadcasting.
audios, channels 1 and 2.
Let me make sure I got this set up right. If anyone else is having problems, feel free to raise your hand or put that in the chat. I did have it.
A few people mentioned it. That's why
Okay.
I figured, okay, I'm not
let
the only
me-
one with the problem.
Troubleshoot here. Slight divergence, sorry. I've got that there. Where is this going? Stereo. That's going there. Aha. I gotcha. I think I know what the problem is, and the problem is right here.
Yep, that's
How
good.
about now?
Thank you. Yep.
Yep. Okay. Sorry, guys. I'm very
Details. If it
sorry for
doesn't
that. I
work,
know.
turn it up.
Turn it up. That's usually what the answer is. It's a simple problem. Okay, so now everyone should be able to hear this. I apologize during the DCS segment that nobody was hearing anything. If you want me to go back to any of that, I will. But okay, we're on track now. So what we're hearing now is basically all our mix minus all of these groups now, because now all of my actual group faders are all the way down, so we're not hearing any of these directly. Now if I just get these back up to Unity, now I can reapply, here we go, all my different groups back to the mix. And I wanted to illustrate that so you really see we're rerouting the signal here. It's not going to the output directly, it's going through these groups and then back to the output. So this fader is very important. So you can have the ability to take stuff out of the mix entirely with one fader, or mute it, kind of ride things a little hotter. And one of the differentiators here is if we were to do nothing else. I'm going to stop this real quick. If we were to do nothing else with these now, so I've got these set up just as they are, this could be sort of an alternative to a DCA in that it is not going to affect the levels going to effects now. So if we just wanted to have standard level control, right, but we don't necessarily want to be driving into our effects any differently, we could use these for that purpose. Additionally now, we do have other processing. So we're going to dive into that. I'm going to actually start with my horns channel here. So on horns, you can do a couple of really cool things. On any channel, you can do a couple of really, really cool things, but I'm going to just use horns as my example here. For one, I can apply effects to my horns. And what I'm going to do now is actually use one of my mute groups. See, that was a spoiler alert. I'm going to activate my horn solo mute group so I can just isolate my horns and listen to this section for a little bit here. So if I play my audio back, and we're just getting the horns. Yep, there they are. Now I can write up some reverb. I'll take it up to an extreme level. There you go. So that, whoa, huge. But yeah, but being able to apply, just some common reverb to that group can really kind of like glue that together. Now in the mix, I do have each individual horn going out to the reverb on their own, and so we've kind of already created a blend that way. But this is another way you could do it, or you could just apply a little bit on top of what's going to each individual channel as well. The other nice thing that we can do specifically on our horns is give it a little compression. So there actually is, I'll show you, there is compression going to each of these horn channels already. So we do have a little bit of a compressor happening on each individual one. Then we can use an additional compressor within its group. I'm going to turn this on. I'm going to switch this to compressor. And we can use this additional compressor and kind of compress the group, and that allows us to give it a little more presence in the mix and kind of give it a little bit more weight and can sit better and draw a little bit of attention to it, and can just add some nice color to it as well. A compressor is a really great tool for just kind of adding some coloration to different things. And with a group, we can add that coloration to a whole group of channels. So to kind of just real quickly dial this in a little bit, I'm going to take that knee out. Because we're dealing with horns, I'm going to give it a relatively fast attack time. Yeah, maybe like 1.47. The release is fine on here. I'm going to get the ratio just a little higher here, like 3 to 1. And then I'm going to use my threshold here, and I'm going to bring this down until I start to see some gain reduction. Oops, I'm on my wrong channel. I'm in my vocal channel. I thought that was weird. There we go. So now I got horns in there. I'm going to redo this. Turn that on. Got 1.47. Always make sure you're in the right channel, guys. This is why we name things. 3 to 1, that's fine. Okay, now I can see I got some reduction here already, and that's probably good. I'm going to restart my track. Yeah, right. So it's just kind of hitting there, just giving it an overall just some nice presence. If I turn that off, I'm going to restart it again. There's just some nice blast in the opening of the track. Okay. All right, so it's very, very subtle. The trick, a lot of the tricks here is you're not really actually hearing much, and you're not really overtly affecting the signal. It's more of a, it's just creating kind of a feeling. It's creating a vibe with it. And if I were to return my full mix now and listen to this, give it a little more. Restart one more time. We're all going to be real sick of this track pretty soon. Yeah. Okay. So it just has a little bit more weight in the mix, a little bit more presence. Again, it's very subtle, but it can be a really nice trick to just adding a little bit of density to some channels or some groups of channels. And this is actually an example of something called series compression, which I'm going to touch on a little bit more at the end of the lesson. So we'll put a pin in that. But yeah, that's an example of series compression, which is a method of multiple compressions. So we're using more than one compressor within a certain signal. Okay, before we get too much into that, this is an example of that method 1 that I mentioned. So we've set up some
Jason.
subgroups in our main mix. Jacob.
Actually, we have somebody who's raised their hand.
All right.
We'll see if David has a question, possibly. David, if you do have a question, go ahead and unmute yourself, and you can ask away real quick. Or maybe... oh.
I had a question, but you answered it.
Oh, I answered it.
Well, it was about, you said, I forget what you said. But it answered it.
Okay,
Great.
Well, there you go.
Good question, great answer.
Yeah, fantastic.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, David. Very good. I'm going to re-situate that there. Just bugging me. It's crooked. All right. This is obviously what I'm working with here is a musical performance. So these groupings make sense for me. Just to reiterate, there are different applications that you could group things differently within. One thing in particular in which a subgroup can be very advantageous is if this is a speaking event and you have different groups of, again, headset microphones or lavalier microphones. We have an extra stage of EQ in here now. So if I just, for example, go to my vocal channel, we have an EQ that we can apply to this group of channels, which is really advantageous specifically for lav and headset microphones because they can be kind of unwieldy in the mix and hard to kind of tame those and they can feedback very easily. So having this additional layer, so we can actually use this to kind of fix broader mix problems within a group of channels, and then that frees up the actual channel EQs to make kind of tonal changes that are specific to each microphone or each instrument. It also frees up our main EQ from having to deal having to overtly deal with kind of feedback problems and things like that. We can use that more to kind of tone the room and shape the sound of the room itself. And so having this additional stage really gives us a lot more control of the mix. It gives us a lot more control over feedback and things like that. And in a speaking environment particularly, but in anything really, having this additional EQ stage is a really, really helpful thing to have in your arsenal. Yeah, okay, so just wanted to point that out. Let's talk about a couple of the other methods here. So we've set this up within our main mix, and we've seen that example. Now let's say we want to take some of our stems that we've created, take some of our groups and create stems to send them out of our mixer using our auxes. It's incredibly easy to do this. If I just start with my drums here, my drums group, so I enter into my drums subgroup here, and I go to the auxes tab within there. I just take this, so I know that I'm just going to use my first 4 or 5 aux outputs on my mixer here, and those are going to go out to maybe another mixer or a recording device or a broadcast device that we just want to have some broader mix control with. So I can send this out, so I can send my drum set out on aux 1. Now I can name aux 1. Actually, this is a really, really handy feature here. If I touch this aux 1 button from this screen, it will take me into my setup and controls for my aux 1 output. And then I can just go to the setup screen here, and I can rename it. I can rename this drums stem. Fine. in the interest of time, I'll just leave it with its misspelling. So now right here I've got this aux is named drum stem, and if I go back into my drum subgroup on my aux 10, now I can see it's called drum stem, and I've delivered this subgroup to my aux1, which is now the drum stem. Now the output can go to wherever it needs to go to be submixed. The other way to do this, so that's from within the group itself. If I go into an actual aux mix, I still have all of my subgroups in here, so I can maybe just take my subgroup fader up right there. Now I've routed my guitar subgroup to aux2, and then I can name aux2 as the guitar stem. Guitar stem, and I could keep going. So I can do this aux3, however many stems I have or how many I want to create and then send out. I can just do the same thing here. Which one is this? Is my keys, occur. And for just to round this out, will be vox, and we'll go ahead and stop there. See, it's done. I want to go into here and name this vox stem, aux4 vox stem. Vox stem. All right. So there we go. So I've created stems. I've created outputs that are dedicated to specific groups within my mix. Then I can now deliver externally for whatever need I have for that. And the great thing about this is because I could clearly just, within my aux mix, I have the ability to create a custom mix. So I could just pull all my drum faders up in here, right? But the good thing about using a group is it is exactly what's happening in the actual main mix. So it is, this fader mix, just in a single channel and with a single fader, that's really easy to do. You just dial that up and you deliver it out, and that you're getting kind of, you're getting the main mix in segments in each little group segment. So you have it segmented that way. You don't have to try and recreate it if you need that. The other cool thing, I'm gonna back up a little bit and talk about DCAs a little bit, because I want to show you, if I go into my auxes here, I still have DCAs in my auxes as well, which is actually a little bit rare on mixers. Usually DCAs or VCAs are only within the main mix control. On TouchMix, you have DCA channels or DCA faders within all of your aux mixes as well. So, if I wanted to have all, the same sort of, larger group control within any of my monitors, within any of my auxes, I have the addition of DCAs there as well. Now, with a DCA, remember, we're not routing signal to it, right? So it does have to have a starting level for it to work with. So there would have to be, some sort of a mix happening here. Where you'd have to kind of dial up some mix for all of your channels that are within all of these DCA groups. So my drum fader would now kind of control the level of these drum channels from their relative positions, remember? My guitar channel right now, or any of my other DCAs, would do nothing because I have no signal coming into this aux mix yet. Okay, so something to be aware of. You do have the DCAs and the subgroups available in all of your auxes. Okay, so that's stems. We've created stems. Let's talk a little bit about the third method here, which is going to be to use this to use subgroups to create a blend or an additional mix within an aux. Very similar to the main mix, actually. If I go into an unused aux here, we'll choose aux5, and I go to my subgroups within my aux5. Now I have all of my subgroups that are already built, already created for me right in here, and I can create sort of an independent or a customized mix within this aux just using my subgroups. So I don't need to create a full-on big fader mix here. I can just use my subgroups because I know, I want some control in this mix, but I don't need that full large fader count level of control. I can just use all of my different groups here and create a customized mix in its output for that purpose. A few examples of what you might use something like this for would be like backstage areas, or green rooms, different areas that are backstage for performers, or in a lot of churches, a lot of house of worship, you have overflow rooms or cry rooms, things like that, lobby areas. If video production is involved. If you have, a video production team here, there might be a video control room or a video control area, and they would need some sort of audio feed, and they'd probably want it a little specific to what they want to hear and what their needs are. Teleprompter operators, speech interpreters, things like that. There's a lot of different things, a lot of different applications which might require some mix that varies from the main mix, but it doesn't have to be a large difference. So you can use groups just to create that little bit of a variation for those different ancillary locations or areas in any given event or location or application, things like that. So that is method 3, just using the subgroups as a blend within a single aux to create a tailored mix for ancillary locations and things like that. Another really cool use case for doing something like this would be to set up aux mixes for performers, right? Somebody has in-ears or even a performer that's using a monitor on stage, and you've given them control of their own mix on their iPhone, right? Or maybe an iPad. They still, they might come into their own little aux mix here, and they have a whole bunch of faders. And if you're performing, that might be a little much, and so you can just give them subgroups. Now they have control of all the different sections on stage. If they want more drum set, they can raise drum set. If they want more or less guitar or more vocals or whatever they want in their mix, they can just use these condensed number of faders to make those changes and dial in the mix that they want for themselves.
So real quick, Jason, I have
Yes.
someone asking why there are not subgroups on the 8 and 16.
It is a processing limitation. They are, the processor on the TouchMix-30 is a little bit more robust, and it can handle a little bit more processing power. And so there are a number of features that are found on the TouchMix-30 that aren't in the 8 and 16 for this reason. It is also sort of it's a little bit of a larger format console, and so we kind of anticipated that it was going to go into larger, medium to large events and venues and things like that might have more of a use for a feature like subgroups. However, this was going to be a surprise at the end. There actually is a way that you can achieve subgroups on an 8 and 16 using your auxes. So it does kind of require you to sacrifice aux channels in a way, but there is a way to actually do that. And since we're here, I'll just go ahead and dive into that. I'll show you how to do that now. Because at this point, I've kind of run through how to set up our subgroups and kind of a few of the different methods to use them and things like that. So yeah, let's do that. Let's jump over to and talk about the 8 and 16 a little bit and how we can use the auxes themselves to create subgroups. It's pretty cool. So what you're going to do, you're going to pick whatever aux you want to work with, or whatever aux you initially want to turn into a subgroup. For me, I'll just pick aux 6 now. My mixer is a TouchMix-30, so there's going to be a slight discrepancy here to what you're going to see. That was gross, I'm sorry. I'm going to go into my main output here for aux 6. I'm in my setup tab here. Right in this section on the 8 and 16, you're going to have an assignment button for the main, left, and right. And I don't have it on the 30, but I actually, just to put it out there, I have taken the liberty of taking a picture. Here we go. I'll change this. Okay, so this is a picture of my TouchMix-16, and you can see right there. There's our assignment button. So main, left, and right. So you have the ability to assign or unassign an aux channel to go to the main output. So now if we're routing an aux output back to the main output, now we're rerouting signal into that aux and then returning it to the main, which allows us to use this in the same fashion as a subgroup, okay? But there's a little bit more that we have to do to set this up aside from just assigning. That's the first step, is you go into your setup there and you hit that button, assign that aux to the main, left, and right. Now, we'll pretend that I have my button and this is a 16 or an 8, right? I've done that. Now what we're going to want to do, we're going to want to stay in here for a second, and we're going to want to switch this aux pickoff point to post fader, okay? That's very important. And we actually have a little series of videos on different aux pickoff points and stuff like that. I definitely recommend you go check those out. But just to give you a high-level explanation of what this does is it's changing the pickoff point of where the signal gets delivered to this aux. So it defaults to pre-fader, which means that the channel fader in the main mix doesn't affect the level of that signal going into any of the auxes or going into this particular aux. Okay, so it's being picked off before the channel fader, and so you don't hear the changes of the main mix fader within the aux. Most of the applications you're using auxes for, you don't want that. In this case, we're going to change this to post fader, and now the pickoff point is going to be after the main mix channel fader. So any change we make in that main channel fader, we're going to hear that in the aux, okay? That's very important. Now, the last step we need to do to set this up properly is go back out to our mix view of this aux, our channel mix for the aux, and then we're going to go and dial up all of the channels that we want to include in our subgroup. So we're using this aux as a subgroup now. So let's say I'm going to just create a subgroup for my drum set. That's my first 7 channels here. Or if you're using the down mix, that's the first 2 channels. I think we gave you just a kick and a snare there. I can dial these all up. I'm going to take all these faders up to unity in the aux mix itself. Okay, that's very important. So we've set it to post fader, and then all of the channel faders for all of the things we want to include in this aux subgroup. Those faders within the aux mix are going to go to unity, okay? So now what's essentially happening is, because we've set the pickoff point to post fader, by delivering the signal into this aux at unity, now we're getting this fader mix. It's mirroring the main fader mix in that aux now. So now any change I make to my faders out here, you're going to hear it reflected in that aux, and it's going to be the exact same mix. Now, for most applications we're using subgroups for, right? We want those channels to go into the sub and then back to the main, right? We don't want it to do both. So we would come into each channel at that point, go into the setup tab here, and this has already happened on my TouchMix-30 because I've already created subgroups here and they've been removed for the main. But this button, you would just want to come in here and make sure that you unassign all of those channels from going to your main output. So now you're rerouting them into the aux, right? And we've set up the aux so it's mirroring our main fader level, so they're being redirected into the aux, and then they're being delivered back to the main output, and you have your aux master fader now, which is controlling the level, you know, that it is being delivered to your main mix. And now, so all those channels are grouped into the aux, and so this is your main group channel fader now. And when you go into the aux itself, now you have all the processing available of the aux itself. So you have your parametric EQ, your graphic EQ. So there you go. So there's your extra EQ stage. We've got a limiter / compressor. So there you go. There's your extra compressor stage. And you got presets and things like that. So the only thing that you really can't do here is apply effects, you know, in the group. But you can highly take advantage of this. You can apply a couple of other different kind of complex mixing techniques that involve using groups as well. But just setting yourself up like this and having this extra stage on your N16 can really help you out and can be really advantageous. So thanks for that question. That was a fine segue into what was going to be kind of my closing segment here, but that's fine. And I hope that answered your question, and I hope you're able to follow that pretty easily. So step 1 on a TouchMix-16, assign an aux to the main, set it to post fader, dial up all the channels in that aux mix that you want to be in that group to unity, and you're there. And then go back and unassign them from the main mix. Now, on that note, I'm going to get into something that's a little bit more complex and some of the more creative ways that you can use groups and employ groups within your mixes. Groups give us the ability to, as I mentioned earlier, apply a technique called multiple compression. And I'm using the term multiple compression because there are a few different variations of multiple compression, and they are often confused with each other, or either they're confused with each other or they're all considered the same thing, and that's not true. So just to kind of talk about this for a second. So multiple compression is very simply the practice of using more than one compressor on a single signal. This is very common in recording. It's very, very common in recording, and within a DAW software, you have the ability to really take that signal into a lot of different places and reroute it and redirect it into different buses and things like that. And so you can create different stages within your DAW mix where you can start applying compression at different points in your signal. On a live mixer, you have fewer of those stages to work with, but if you have the ability to use groups like this, now we can actually start to get into this. So using multiple compressors on a single signal. So within this practice of multiple compression, you have what's known as parallel compression, you have what's known as series compression, and you have something known as bus compression. So I'm going to talk about all three of those in a little bit. I'm going to give you examples of 2 of them actually within the mix that I have here. The first one I want to talk about is parallel compression, okay? And I'm going to give you an example of this. I'm going to actually use my lead vocal channel, and then I'm going to set up some parallel compression here. The key difference, or the key element of a parallel compression setup, is you are you have your initial signal, and you might be applying some compression to that channel directly. Like for instance, if I go to my vocal channel, I do have a compressor on this channel, so that is set up. It's compressing my vocals, and then you have the signal, and you pick it off, you split it, and then you send it to a group or a bus in a DAW software, in a DAW software, and then that group signal, the signal is going to that group or that bus. You apply another compressor to that signal, and you heavily compress that, and then you blend that heavily compressed signal back with the signal that is going directly to the main output. So this requires us to continue to have our channel go to the main output as well as the group. And it looks like the sun is washing out my focus a little bit here. I apologize, guys. All right, so yeah, I'm going to go ahead and just show you this real quick. So we've got our compressor on our vocal channel. I'm going to go ahead and start a brand new subgroup here. I'm going to go to subgroup 6. Okay, and I'm going to set it up. I'm going to select our male vocal channel, but before I do that, I'm going to toggle this off, or to no. So no, I don't want to unassign this from the main left and right channel. Now, because I've already assigned my vocal channel in this case to a different group, it's already been unassigned, so I'm going to go just redo that. But had it not been pre-assigned and you were going to want to apply a technique like this, make sure that's on no, because you want it to continue to go to the main output as well as the group. So we're no longer keeping the signal path linear. I'm just going to go ahead and assign that. And now, since I already talked about it, I'll go back into my channel here, and I'll just go to setup, and I'll pop that back into the main. That's great. Okay, now back in my subgroup, I'm going to name this Vox Para. This is my parallel compression channel for my lead vocals. Now, I'm going to go ahead and get into my compressor. I'm going to actually make that a limiter. I'm going to turn it on, and I'm going to dial this in. So I'm going to get the ratio. Actually, it's a little high. So somewhere around 10 to 1, that's kind of the default of our limiter. Actually, it's about 10 to 1. Somewhere between 10 and 15 to 1 is kind of where you want to sit with this. But it's a pretty high level of compression, at this point considered limiting. And then because we're on a vocal channel, I'm going to take the attack up a little bit. We'll go to a medium attack time of, let's see, like 180-ish. Our release time is fine. And now I'm going to get this going, and I'm going to actually solo this for a minute. We'll be using my mute group that I created. Aha. And I'll play track, roll track. So we want to hear just the vocals. We'll hear them in a second. Okay, that's our isolated lead vocal channel. I'll go into my group here, and I want to go into my compressor here, and I want to I can see my gain reduction here. And I kind of want to just find the sweet spot to where it's, every time he's hitting the channel, it's compressing him relatively significantly, and we're getting some good gain reduction in there. So that looks about good, actually. But negative 27 dB, that's fine. Now, there we go. Yeah, he's hitting it nice and hard. Now, if I was to actually complete this out, the idea here behind this technique is similar to what I did with the horns. I'll stop the audio for a second. The idea here, the reason we use this technique is to add a little bit more presence to the channel within the main mix, and it can add a little bit more thickness to it in the mix as well, and kind of let it to kind of sit a little heavier and just have more presence. So I've applied this compression here, which is the key, the main element here. I'm actually going to take it a step further, just because I can. I'm gonna go into my EQ and EQ this a little bit. This is a trick actually that I learned from John Graves, product manager for TouchMix here. He's a studio and front of house mix engineer legend. So it's really nice to be able to get private lessons from him. But here, so I'm just going to apply my high pass filter here. So that's going to kind of cut out a lot of our low end in the channel. So we're just trying to add presence to a vocal channel, right? This is a vocal channel we're working with. You don't need a lot of low end. And in the channel EQ itself, we've already cut out a lot of that in that particular channel. But we're going to just keep going with our additional EQ stage in our group. And then I'm going to add just a little bit of 6K to this channel. Just a couple, just maybe 3 dB at 6K. I'll take that Q in a little tighter. And again, so that's just going to just give us a little more presence, a little more sparkle, a little more top quality to this vocal. And if I press play, we've got our EQ, we've got our limiting setup, and now I take this fader because we're hearing the vocal because it's still going directly to the main, right? As well as here. So now this fader is just going to, I'm going to ride this up a little bit. Now we see some signal going in here. Okay. So that's very, very soft. If I go up a lot, then we can kind of hear the extreme effect of that. But the idea is to actually not really hear it. You want it just to be presence. It's something, there's just a noticeable quality within the major mix. So let's actually return our complete mix here. And I'll demonstrate again. Oh, there we go, my Vox Para channel. If I mute that, and I unmute it, mute, see, it's a very subtle change. But when I have that activated, there's just something else to that vocal now, and it has a little more presence. It kind of sticks out a little bit, but it's not overtly popping out of the mix. It's still well blended, but it's got a little bit more thickness in the mix. And so it's a really cool trick that you can use. It works obviously great on vocals. It works great on a drum set. It can just add a lot of energy into the sound of a drum set. It's a very popular technique when used in like rock and metal and certain types of blues and things like that, where you want that a little more aggressive drum sound. You can use it on bass guitar, guitars, and things like that. If you just kind of want to thicken things up and give a little more presence to certain elements of the mix, that's a really nice technique that you can use. And so that is parallel compression. Now, we've already seen an example of what's called series compression, which is again using our multiple compression technique. I did this already with the horns. Unlike our parallel compression, where we have the signal going directly to the main output as well as to our group, and we've got those two compressors that are blending into each other, I've kept my signal path linear here, but I still have compression on all of my horn channels. So if we look at the channels again, I've got a compressor activated on each one. So each channel has its initial compressor, and then it's going through the group, not through the main, back through the group, and then on the group itself, I have an additional compressor, so that's called series. So those compressors are being run in series of each other instead of parallel to each other, because the signal is remaining linear instead of having two different signals that are converging. So that is series multiple compression versus parallel multiple compression. Both of these techniques are extremely advantageous for again, adding presence, adding body to different things, and just kind of helping you tame your mix and create different types of energy within your mix depending on the genre or the style that you're going for. The third type, just to mention it, I don't have an example of it here, but the third type of this, as I mentioned, there's something called bus compression, which is actually not really using it's not really multiple compression, because you're back to kind of using a singular compressor, but instead of applying the compressor on the channel itself, using the channel compressor here, we're not using this compressor at all, so we would turn that off in whatever channel or channels we've assigned to our group. And then we use the bus compressor or the group compressor instead. And so that is, if you have a group of channels and you want to apply some light compression to the group, but more or less just to kind of maybe bring it together or add a little bit of coloration to that group, but you don't need or want to compress each channel individually within that group. You just use the one compressor in the group or in that bus, and that is bus compression. So there you go. That's it. That's my lesson for you. I got through everything that I wanted to show off and highlight here. So hopefully I was able to give you some good tips and good tricks and kind of help you to understand how the groups work and when they might be important or useful to you. Again, these are all just examples that I'm using here. Your application could be wildly different. So I'm hoping you have a good understanding of what the groups do, how they work, and how they could be helpful to you. So let's go ahead and just open it up to some questions if there are any. I apologize again for my blurry screen. We're doing this from home, guys. I'm actually sitting in my kitchen, believe it or not. I know it's smoke and mirrors, but we're making it work. We're doing what we can. So yeah, any questions? Anybody have any questions or comments or anything like that? Concerns? Anybody confused about anything?
Doesn't look like we have any questions coming through at the moment.
I've been trying to answer them fast and furiously as they keep coming in.
Cool. Well, good.
As you explained, they're asking
the
application
Q&A
questions, so I'm quickly trying to fill it in.
Awesome. Okay. Well, then, if there are no final questions or remarks, then we'll probably just go ahead and call it. Thanks, guys, for joining us. We're very happy to have you here from wherever you're joining from. If you've been kind of following along with this series, we're happy to have you keep on sticking with us and keep on coming back. We do have a lot more on the calendar at this point. We've got webinars scheduled all throughout May. The next one's going to be next Tuesday. We're going to go over some of the deeper, more advanced workflow features that the Mixer offers. We're going to talk about patch matrix. We're going to talk about user buttons and the MIDI feature and security and things like that. A couple of the more, the deeper functions of the Mixer that don't really get brought to the surface a lot. And then...
looks like we have a question. Oh,
okay.
Nope, just a comment.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for... Yeah, okay.
Okay.
So thank you, comment.
Please come back, check out the calendar. I think, real quick, I'll see if I can get a link for Jacob to drop in the chat here.
Just really quick, Jason, the multi-tracks that you send, they arrive in an email. Is that correct?
No. So so your follow-up email after your registration should have included a link, a download link, and it's a zip file. The link would just automatically download a zip file onto your computer system from our server, and there's some instructions that I included in there that explain how to unzip and kind of pull the tracks off. So if you were able to get those, if you have those, great. And if you're able to kind of follow along with me a little bit using those, that's super cool. And beyond that, beyond using them for here, you now have some tracks that you can use at your leisure to practice with or to work with. If you have different tracks, I encourage you to play with stuff, work with stuff, or plug your whatever instrument or instruments you play, like plug stuff in, get some audio going, start using some of these features, and just get as familiar as you can with this awesome tool. It's a pretty powerful piece of equipment, and it's relatively easy to operate, and you can get up and running and get yourself a really, really good sound pretty quickly. So, and then when you get into the features like the groups and things like that and start understanding the effects, last week we talked about recording, and it's got a whole really great recording session. If you didn't catch that, we're actually going to be revisiting that topic in a couple of weeks. So all of the topics that we're going to go through, we're going to be revisiting as well. So if you miss any of them, I encourage you to check the calendar, and please come on back and join us for any and all of these. So we're having fun. Hopefully you're having fun.
I dropped that link
hanging out with us.
that you mentioned.
Perfect. So
that's
link
in the chat
to our webinar calendar. Check it out. Sign up for anything that might look interesting to you, and hopefully we're imparting some valuable knowledge to you, helping you out, and give you something to do while you're sitting in your house. Just come join us for an hour.
Great.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
All right, and we'll go ahead and call it. Thanks, everyone.
Alrighty.
See you
Take care,
next time.
guys.